The sky was a deep orange when we rolled into Fallujah. I was riding shotgun in the lead Humvee, my M16 cradled in my lap, watching the city streets through the dusty windshield. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and your trigger finger get twitchy. We'd been hearing reports of increased insurgent activity in the area for weeks now, but so far it had been nothing but ghost stories and rumors. Intel said they were planning something big, but Intel was always saying shit like that. You learn to take it with a grain of salt and just focus on the mission at hand. Our mission was simple: set up a sniper position in a bombed-out building on the edge of the city and keep an eye on the main roads in and out. Command wanted early warning if the insurgents tried to make a move. It was supposed to be a milk run, a couple of days of sitting around with our thumbs up our asses, watching the world go by through a rifle scope. But as we rolled deeper into the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving straight into the mouth of hell. The streets were empty, the buildings abandoned. Even the stray dogs that usually roamed the alleys were nowhere to be seen. It was like the whole city was holding its breath, waiting for the hammer to fall. We pulled up in front of a 3-story building that had seen better days. Half of the roof was caved in, and the walls were pockmarked with bullet holes and scorch marks. It looked like it had been through a meat grinder, but it was still standing, and that was good enough for us. I hopped out of the Humvee, my boots kicking up a cloud of dust as they hit the ground. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and gave a quick hand signal to my spotter, Corporal Jake Gonzo Gonzalez. He nodded and grabbed his gear, falling into step beside me as we made our way into the building. The inside was even worse than the outside. The floors were littered with rubble and debris, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. We picked our way through the mess, heading for the stairs that led up to the roof. As we climbed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settling over me. It was like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I'd been in plenty of hairy situations before, but something about this one felt different. It felt wrong. We reached the roof and picked out a spot with a good view of the surrounding streets. Gonzo set up the spotting scope while I got my rifle situated. We worked in silence, the only sound the distant rumble of artillery fire and the occasional gust of wind whistling through the empty buildings. And then, just as the last sliver of sun slipped below the horizon, all hell broke loose. The first explosion rocked the building, showering us with dust and debris. I instinctively ducked down, my rifle clutched tight to my chest. Gonzo was beside me, his eyes wide with adrenaline and fear. "What the fuck was that?" he yelled over the ringing in our ears. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the city had erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed from every direction, the sharp crack of AK-47s and the deeper thump of RPGs. Tracer rounds streaked across the night sky like angry fireflies, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite and smoke. We scrambled to our feet, trying to get a bead on the situation. The streets below were swarming with insurgents, their faces wrapped in scarves and their eyes blazing with hate. They were pouring out of every alley and doorway, firing wildly as they advanced on our position. I brought my rifle up to my shoulder and started picking off targets, the recoil slamming into me with each shot. Beside me, Gonzo was calling out range and wind speed, his voice steady despite the mayhem. But for every insurgent we dropped, 2 more seemed to take their place. They were coming at us from all sides, their bullets chipping away at the concrete around us. We were outnumbered and outgunned, and we both knew it. "We can't stay here," I shouted over the din of battle. "We're too exposed." Gonzo nodded, his face grim. "Where do we go?" I scanned the building, looking for a way out. The stairs we'd come up were a no-go. The insurgents would be on us before we made it halfway down. But there was another set of stairs on the far side of the roof, leading down into the heart of the building. "There," I said, pointing. "We'll make a stand inside." We grabbed our gear and sprinted for the stairs, bullets whizzing past our heads. I could feel the heat of their passage on my skin, hear the angry buzz as they tore through the air inches from my face. We burst through the door at the bottom of the stairs and found ourselves in a long, dark hallway. The walls were pitted with bullet holes, and the floor was slick with something that smelled coppery and thick. I flipped on my weapon light, the beam cutting through the gloom. Gonzo did the same, and together we moved down the hallway, our boots crunching on the debris. We were halfway down when a shape lunged out of a doorway to our right. I caught a glimpse of a wild-eyed man with an AK-47 before Gonzo put a round through his forehead. The insurgent dropped like a sack of meat, his weapon clattering to the floor. We kept moving, our hearts hammering in our chests. The building was a maze of rooms and corridors, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. We cleared each room as we came to it, our movements smooth and practiced, honed by months of training and combat. But as we pressed deeper into the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The insurgents had been too quick to give up the street, too eager to drive us inside. It felt like they were herding us, pushing us towards something we couldn't see. And then, as we rounded a corner and found ourselves standing in a makeshift hospital ward, I realized with a sinking feeling that I was right. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a few flickering fluorescent bulbs that hung from the ceiling. The air was thick with the stench of blood and infection, and the floor was littered with soiled bandages and empty IV bags. Rows of cots lined the walls, each one occupied by a wounded civilian. Men, women, children, all of them bearing the marks of the insurgents' brutality. Some were missing limbs, others had their faces wrapped in blood-soaked gauze. They moaned and cried out in pain, their voices echoing off the bare concrete walls. I felt bile rising in my throat as I took in the scene. This wasn't a hospital. It was a charnel house, a place where the insurgents brought their victims to suffer and die. Gonzo and I exchanged a grim look. We both knew what we had to do. We couldn't leave these people here to be slaughtered by the insurgents. We had to get them out, somehow. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing from the hallway behind us. The insurgents had followed us inside, and they were closing in fast. "Barricade the door," I snapped at Gonzo, and he moved to comply, dragging a heavy metal desk across the entrance. I turned to the nearest patient, a young woman with a shattered leg. "Can you walk?" I asked her, my voice urgent. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, sir," she whispered in broken English. "I cannot feel my feet." I gritted my teeth and moved to the next cot, assessing each patient in turn. Most of them were in no condition to move, let alone fight. We were going to have to defend this room with just the two of us. I was just about to tell Gonzo to take up a position by the window when I heard a low growl from the corner of the room. I spun around, my rifle at the ready, and found myself staring into the eyes of a mangy-looking dog. It was a big beast, with matted fur and a scar across its muzzle. It looked half-starved and mean as hell, but there was something in its eyes that gave me pause. It wasn't growling at us. It was growling at the door. As if on cue, the barricade shuddered as the insurgents slammed into it from the other side. They were trying to force their way in, and it was only a matter of time before they succeeded. I looked back at the dog, an idea forming in my mind. "Gonzo," I said quietly, "I think we just found ourselves an early warning system." He followed my gaze to the dog and nodded slowly. "Roger that." We took up positions on either side of the door, our rifles trained on the entrance. The dog crouched beside me, its hackles raised and its teeth bared. For a long moment, there was no sound except for the ragged breathing of the patients and the distant thump of artillery fire. And then, with a splintering crash, the barricade gave way, and the insurgents burst into the room. The dog leapt forward with a snarl, launching itself at the nearest insurgent. The man screamed as the dog's jaws clamped down on his throat, and then Gonzo and I opened fire, our rounds tearing through the packed mass of bodies in the doorway. The insurgents returned fire, their bullets ripping into the walls and shattering the windows. I felt a hot line of pain sear across my ribs as a round grazed me, but I kept firing, my finger tight on the trigger. Beside me, the dog was a blur of fur and fangs, taking down insurgents left and right. It was a fierce and loyal beast, and in that moment, I knew we would have been dead without it. But even with the dog's help, we were still badly outnumbered. The insurgents kept coming, stepping over the bodies of their fallen comrades to get at us. We were running out of ammo, and fast. I was just about to call out to Gonzo to fall back when the room suddenly went dark. The fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered and died, plunging us into complete blackness. And then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the howling of the desert wind and the hiss of sand against the windows. The sandstorm had arrived, and with it, a whole new kind of hell. The sandstorm hit like a freight train, the wind slamming into the building with a force that shook the walls. Sand blasted through the shattered windows, stinging my eyes and filling my mouth with grit. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, let alone the insurgents who were still trying to kill us. Beside me, Gonzo was coughing and spitting, his rifle held tight against his chest. "We need to move," he shouted over the howling wind. "We're sitting ducks here." I knew he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my gut. The sandstorm was a blessing and a curse. It would make it harder for the insurgents to find us, but it would also make it damn near impossible for us to find our way out of this labyrinth of a building. Still, anything was better than staying put and waiting for the insurgents to regroup. I gave Gonzo a nod, and we started moving, keeping low and using the flickering light of our weapon-mounted flashlights to guide us. The dog stayed close, its ears flattened against its head as it navigated the swirling sand. I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for the beast. Without it, we would have been dead long before the sandstorm hit. We moved through the building room by room, searching for a way out. The place was a maze of corridors and stairwells, each one leading to another dead end, or a room full of terrified civilians. I could feel my frustration mounting with each passing minute, my heart pounding in my chest as the walls seemed to close in around me. And then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, a woman's voice, screaming in pain and terror. It was coming from somewhere up ahead, and it was getting louder. I exchanged a glance with Gonzo, and I could see the same fear in his eyes that I felt in my own. We both knew what that sound meant. The insurgents had found the civilians, and they were taking out their rage on the helpless and the wounded. I gritted my teeth and pushed forward, my rifle held tight against my shoulder. I couldn't let those people die, not like this, not when we were so close to getting them out. But even as I moved, I could feel the weight of my own fears and doubts bearing down on me. I had seen so much death and destruction in this war, so much senseless violence and cruelty. It had changed me, hardened me in ways I never thought possible. I wondered if I would ever be able to go back to the way I was before, or if the horrors of this place would haunt me forever. We reached the end of the corridor and found ourselves in a large, open room. It was some kind of storage area, with shelves stacked high with medical supplies and equipment. And there, huddled in the corner, were a dozen or so civilians, their faces contorted in fear. Standing over them were 3 insurgents, their weapons trained on the cowering group. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard, turned to face us as we entered, a cruel smile playing across his lips. "Well, well," he said in heavily accented English. "Look what we have here. A couple of American dogs come to die with their tails between their legs." I felt a surge of anger at his words, but I kept my voice steady as I replied. "It's over," I said, my rifle trained on his chest. "Let these people go, and we'll let you walk out of here alive." The insurgent laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the walls. "You think you can bargain with us, American? You think you have any power here?" He raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You are nothing but a pawn in a game you cannot hope to understand. And now, you will die, like all the others who have stood in our way." I saw his finger start to squeeze, and I knew I had only a split second to act. But even as I began to move, I heard a sound that made my heart stop in my chest. It was the click of a rifle bolt coming from somewhere behind me. And then, before I could even turn to look, the room exploded in a hail of gunfire. The insurgents were cut down where they stood, their bodies jerking and twitching as the bullets tore through them. I spun around, my rifle at the ready, and found myself staring at a sight that made my jaw drop open in shock. It was Gonzo, his rifle smoking in his hands, a look of grim determination on his face. And standing beside him, his own weapon raised and ready, was the dog. Together, they had taken out the insurgents before they could even get a shot off. They had saved us all in a moment of pure instinctive action. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, followed by a sense of awe at what I had just witnessed. In that moment, I realized that I had been wrong about so many things. I had thought that the only way to survive in this war was to harden myself, to push away all emotion and compassion. But looking at Gonzo and the dog, I saw the truth. It was our humanity that made us strong, our ability to care for others and fight for what was right. That was what separated us from the insurgents, from the monsters who would slaughter the innocent without a second thought. And as the sandstorm raged on outside, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I knew that we would make it out of this, that we would find a way to save these people and get them to safety. Because in the end, that was what we were fighting for. Not for glory or power, but for the simple, fundamental right of every human being to live in peace and security. And with Gonzo and the dog by my side, I knew that we would never stop fighting for that, no matter the cost. We made our way out of the building, the civilians huddled between us as we pushed through the swirling sand. The storm had started to die down, but the air was still thick with grit and debris, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of us. We had just reached the edge of the compound when I heard the unmistakable crack of a sniper rifle. The sound was distant, muffled by the wind, but I knew instantly what it meant. "Sniper!" I yelled, dragging one of the civilians to the ground with me. Gonzo was already moving, hustling the others towards a low wall that offered some cover. I risked a glance over the top of the wall, scanning the surrounding buildings for any sign of the shooter. The glare of the sun off the sand made it hard to see, but I caught a flicker of movement in a window about 500 yards away. "Gonzo, you see him?" I called out, my eyes never leaving the window. There was no response. I turned to look and felt my heart stop in my chest. Gonzo was lying on the ground, his eyes wide and staring. There was a small, neat hole in the center of his forehead, and a pool of blood was spreading out beneath him. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "No, no, no." I crawled over to him, my hands shaking as I felt for a pulse, but I already knew it was too late. Gonzo was gone, taken out by a single perfect shot. I felt a rage building inside me, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume me entirely. I looked back at the window, my eyes narrowing as I focused on the small, dark shape that I knew was the sniper. He was good, whoever he was. He had taken out Gonzo with a shot that most snipers could only dream of making. But he had made one mistake. He had left me alive. I unslung my rifle and brought it up to my shoulder, my breathing slow and steady as I lined up the shot. The sniper was still there, his rifle trained on our position, waiting for one of us to make a move. I knew I only had one chance. If I missed, he would take me out just like he had taken out Gonzo. But I also knew that I couldn't let him live, couldn't let him continue to terrorize and kill the innocent. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as I centered the crosshairs on the sniper's head. And then, with a gentle squeeze of the trigger, I sent a bullet screaming across the distance between us. The sniper jerked and fell, his rifle clattering to the ground beside him. I watched through my scope as he twitched and lay still, a dark stain spreading out beneath him. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction, mixed with a deep, aching sadness. Gonzo was gone, and nothing could bring him back. But at least I had avenged him, had made sure that his killer would never hurt anyone else again. And I turned back to the civilians who were huddled together behind the wall, their faces pale with fear. "We have to keep moving," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "It's not safe here." They nodded, too terrified to speak. I helped them to their feet, my eyes scanning the surrounding buildings for any sign of movement. And then I saw it, a glint of metal in a window, the flash of a scope in the sun. There was another sniper out there, watching us, waiting for his chance to strike. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the truth. The sniper I had just killed hadn't been alone. He had been part of a team, a group of elite marksmen who had been sent to take us out. And now, with Gonzo gone, I was the only thing standing between them and the civilians we had sworn to protect. I gritted my teeth and raised my rifle, my eyes locked on the distant window. I knew that I was outmatched, that the odds were stacked against me, but I also knew that I had no choice. I was a Marine, a warrior sworn to defend the innocent and the helpless, and I would fight to my last breath to keep these people safe, no matter the cost. The sniper's rifle flashed, and I felt the bullet whip past my head, close enough to ruffle my hair. I returned fire, my own round smashing into the wall beside the window. And then I was moving, running, zigzagging across the open ground as the sniper tried to draw a bead on me. I could hear the crack of his rifle, the hiss of bullets passing just inches from my body. But I didn't stop, didn't falter. I had a job to do, a duty to fulfill, and I would see it through to the end, no matter what happened to me. Because that was what it meant to be a Marine, to be a part of something greater than myself. And in that moment, as the bullets flew and the sand swirled around me, I had never felt more alive, or more certain of my purpose. I was a warrior, a protector, a shield against the darkness, and I would not fail, not now, not ever. We ran, the civilians stumbling and crying out in fear as we pushed them onwards. The sniper's bullets chased us, kicking up sprays of sand and rock wherever they struck. I could feel the heat of them as they passed, could hear the angry buzz of their passage just inches from my head. But I didn't stop, didn't falter. I had to get these people to safety, had to find a way out of this hellish city and back to the relative safety of our base. And so I ran, my lungs burning and my legs aching with every step. The dog ran with us, its tongue lolling from its mouth as it panted with exertion. It had stayed with us through everything, through the firefights and the chaos and the death. And now, as we ran for our lives, it was still by our side, still fighting with us. I risked a glance back over my shoulder, trying to catch a glimpse of the sniper. But all I could see was the swirling sand, the shattered buildings, and the distant hazy outline of the city walls. We had to make it out of the city, had to find a way through the maze of streets and alleys and back to the open desert. It was our only chance, our only hope of survival. But even as I thought it, I heard a cry of pain from behind me. I turned to look, and saw one of the civilians stumbling, clutching at his leg. He had been hit, the bullet tearing through his calf and sending him sprawling to the ground. I skidded to a halt, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that I couldn't leave him, couldn't abandon him to die in the street. But I also knew that every second we delayed was another second that the sniper had to line up his shot, to pick us off one by one. I made my decision in an instant. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and ran back to the wounded man, hauling him to his feet and slinging his arm over my shoulder. He cried out in pain, but I ignored it, dragging him onwards as fast as I could. The others had stopped, huddling together in the scant shelter of a ruined wall. They watched me with wide, frightened eyes as I approached, the wounded man hanging limp and heavy against me. "We have to keep moving," I said, my voice ragged with exertion. "We can't stay here." They nodded, too terrified to speak. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. And then, with a howling roar, the sandstorm hit us once again. It came out of nowhere, a wall of swirling, choking sand that blasted through the streets and alleys like a living thing. It tore at our clothes and skin, filling our mouths and noses with grit and dirt. I staggered, nearly losing my grip on the wounded man. The sand was blinding, stinging my eyes and making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I could hear the others crying out in fear and pain, could feel the press of their bodies against mine as we struggled onwards. But even as we fought against the storm, I felt a flicker of hope in my chest. The sniper would be just as blind as we were, just as lost and disoriented in the swirling chaos. It was our chance, our one opportunity to escape. I pushed forward, my legs burning with the effort. The sand tore at my skin, my eyes, my lungs, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not now, not when we were so close. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm began to die down. The wind lessened, the sand settling back to the earth in a soft, whispering hiss. I blinked, my eyes tearing up as I tried to clear the grit from them. And then I saw it, just ahead of us, the city wall, looming up out of the haze like a mirage. We had made it. Against all odds, against all hope, we had made it out of the city and back to the open desert. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, so strong that it nearly brought me to my knees. We had survived, had fought our way through hell and come out the other side. But even as I thought it, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the crack of a rifle, distant but unmistakable, coming from somewhere behind us. I spun around, my heart in my throat, and there, just visible through the haze of sand, I saw the sniper. He was lying prone on a distant dune, his rifle trained on us, his finger tight on the trigger. I reacted on instinct, throwing myself in front of the civilians just as the sniper fired. I felt the bullet slam into my chest, felt the white-hot pain of it tearing through my flesh. I landed hard on my back, my breath leaving me in a ragged gasp. I could feel the blood spreading out beneath me, soaking into the sand in a dark, glistening pool. The dog was by my side in an instant, its muzzle pressed against my cheek as it whined in distress. I reached up with a trembling hand, running my fingers through its thick, matted fur. "Good dog," I whispered, my voice barely more than a croak. "Good boy." I could hear the others screaming, could hear the sound of their footsteps as they ran to me. But it all seemed so distant, so far away. I looked up at the sky, at the endless expanse of blue that stretched out above me. It was beautiful, so beautiful that it made my heart ache. And then I saw them, the faces of my fallen comrades, the men and women I had fought beside and bled with. They were there, waiting for me, their smiles warm and welcoming. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a deep, abiding calm that seemed to fill my entire being. I had done my duty, had fought and bled and died for something greater than myself. And now, as the darkness closed in around me and the world began to fade away, I knew that I had found my true purpose, my true calling. I was a Marine, a warrior, a protector, and I would rest easy, knowing that I had lived and died as one. My eyes slipped closed, and I let out a final, rattling breath. And then I was gone, slipping away into the warm, welcoming embrace of the afterlife. But even as I faded away, I knew that my story was not over, that my legacy would live on. For I had fought the good fight, had given my all for the sake of others. And in the end, that was all that mattered. That was the true measure of a life well lived. The news of my death spread quickly, rippling out through the ranks of the Marines like a shockwave. They had lost one of their own, a brother in arms who had given his life in defense of the innocent. The civilians I had saved were quick to tell the story of my sacrifice, of how I had thrown myself in front of them and taken the sniper's bullet that had been meant for them. They spoke of my courage, my selflessness, and my unwavering commitment to duty. And as the story spread, so too did the legend of my life. The Marines who had served with me, who had fought and bled by my side, began to speak of me in reverent tones, their voices hushed with awe and respect. They spoke of the battles we had fought, the enemies we had faced, and the unbreakable bond of brotherhood that had held us together through it all. They spoke of my skill as a warrior, my unshakable dedication to my fellow Marines, and my unwavering moral compass in the face of impossible odds. And as the stories grew and the legend of my life took hold, something began to change. The Marines who had once looked upon the war with weary resignation, who had seen it as an unwinnable quagmire, began to feel a new sense of purpose, a new fire in their hearts. They looked to my example, to the way I had lived and died, and they found strength in it. They saw in me a symbol of everything that was good and right and true about the Marine Corps, about the values and ideals that they had sworn to uphold. And with that newfound strength, they began to fight harder, to push back against the insurgents with renewed determination and grit. They took to the streets of the city, rooting out the enemy with a ferocity that shocked even the most battle-hardened among them. The insurgents, who had once seemed like an unstoppable force, began to falter in the face of this new onslaught. They retreated deeper into the city, their numbers dwindling with every passing day. And as the tide of battle began to turn, the Marines pressed their advantage. They moved from street to street, building to building, their rifles cracking and their grenades exploding in a symphony of destruction. In the end, it was the civilians who struck the final blow. They rose up against the insurgents, taking to the streets with makeshift weapons and a fury born of years of oppression and fear. They fought side by side with the Marines, their courage and determination a match for even the most battle-hardened warrior. And together, they drove the insurgents from the city, sending them fleeing into the desert in a ragged, broken retreat. The victory was celebrated across the city, the streets erupting in joyous chaos as the people reveled in their newfound freedom. And at the center of it all, the Marines stood tall and proud, their faces lined with the dust and grime of battle, but their eyes shining with the light of triumph. They had won, had beaten back the forces of darkness and oppression, and they had done it in the name of a fallen hero, a man who had given his life so that others might live. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of my sacrifice spread far and wide, reaching even the halls of power back home. The president himself spoke of me in a press conference, his voice thick with emotion as he praised my courage and selflessness. "The actions of this brave Marine," he said, "serve as a reminder of the best that America has to offer. He laid down his life in defense of others, and in doing so, he embodied the highest ideals of our nation. Let us never forget his sacrifice, and let us always strive to live up to his example." The words were met with a thunderous applause, an outpouring of gratitude and respect for a man who had given everything in service to his country. And as the applause faded and the president stepped down from the podium, a hush fell over the room. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire world had paused to remember the life and legacy of a true hero. In that moment, I knew that my story would live on, that my name would be remembered long after my body had returned to dust. I had made a difference, had left a mark on the world that would endure long after I was gone. And as I looked down from the heavens, watching over the world that I had fought and died to protect, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had done my duty, had served my country and my fellow man with honor and distinction. And in the end, that was all that mattered. That was the legacy I had left behind, the indelible mark of a life well lived. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the afterlife envelop me in its embrace. And as I drifted off into eternity, I knew that I could rest easy, secure in the knowledge that my story would endure, a shining beacon of hope and inspiration for generations to come.